One of the biggest reasons that TrustBridge was formed and started was that there were people doing this in the secular world, and they were charging 5%, 7%, 12% or more to do this cross-border granting, and they were for-profit businesses. And so TrustBridge has come in almost as a disruptor in this marketplace, to be honest with you, and charging just 1% to do this. And we're a non-profit. So for us, it's not about making money. We're a ministry ourselves, and we want to serve and support all of the donors that work with NCF to be able to do international granting, to open up the world to you. Instead of just having to focus on US 501c3s, the world is now your oyster, as they say.
Welcome to the Generosity Now podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories of generosity and whole life stewardship. Our goal is to showcase individuals and organizations making a positive impact in our communities and across the globe. I'm your host, Eric Most, president of the National Christian Foundation, Rocky Mountain Region. And I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Laurie Bossert, VP on our team. Laurie, how are you doing today?
It's a beautiful day. It's exciting that we get this chance to gather together and share with Paul.
That's right. Well, we are in a solution series where we're highlighting organizations that help solve some of your giving frustrations. In this episode, we are talking with Paul Bolte with TrustBridge Global. TrustBridge is a trusted, that's a lot of trust, partner with NCF, and they make global giving easy when there is no U.S.-based 501c3. Paul, welcome to the Generosity Now podcast.
Thanks, Eric. Great to see you. Hi, Laurie.
Paul, why don't you just start us off by telling a little bit about yourself, growing up, how you came to Christ and your family today?
Sure. Well, if you listen to my accent, you only have to listen to me for a very short period of time and you can figure out that I'm not from here. When I first moved to the US, I used to tell people I was from Alabama until I met someone from Alabama. And then I had to start telling people I was from the Southwest, just a long way south and a long way west. So I'm originally from Australia. I grew up literally in the outback of Australia on a farm, 35 miles from the nearest town, 6 hours due west of Sydney. I grew up with an older brother and older sister, grew up in a Christian family, went to church all my life as a kid. And like most kids, you get the message, but it doesn't always sink in. So it was in my head, but it wasn't in my heart. And so I made a decision, I think, when I was about 9 to follow Christ. But, through the teenage years, as most teenagers do, I went off the rails like most teenagers do. And really, by the time I got to university, I was not overly interested in going to church. And I remember that the local university chaplain came to visit my dorm when I was at university. And I said, I go to church at home. And he was like a dog with a bone trying to get me to come to the university church. And in the end, I said to him, listen, you have done the worst thing you could do. You've pushed me away. And said, I don't want to know you, go away. And so for 3 years, I didn't go to church at all while I was at university. And then it was towards the end of my third year, I remember looking over my balcony at university. I saw a pretty girl walking past. And I said, where are you off to? And she said, I'm going to church. And I said, I used to go there. She said, you should come. I said, okay. So I went back to church. And, nothing ever came of that relationship. But I did go back to church and I started to do a Bible study with some folks at university. And it was really then that I discovered really my life verse, which was Ephesians 2, 8-9. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. This is a gift from God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And I really didn't understand that as a kid. I always thought I had to be a good boy and be perfect, and I just couldn't do it. And so I finally discovered grace and accepted Christ when I was about 21 years old. So that's the start of my faith journey. I'm not sure how far down that track you want to go, but happy to answer any more questions.
Paul, it's actually interesting. I don't know if we shared this before when we talked, but your and my journey is actually very similar. There was a season after college that I'd kind of walked away from the church, and it was a girl that I met at a pool party that invited me to church, and nothing ever happened there either, but it was God drawing me back into fellowship with him. It's just so beautiful.
Having raised 3 boys, I have to say, I often prayed for those girls to keep the boys in line.
Oh, that's awesome. And Paul, what brought you to the U.S.?
Well, that's a good question. My journey started I started in New South Wales in Australia. I moved to Sydney to go to university. From there, I moved to Perth for 12 years, which is on the other side of the country. And from there, I moved to Auckland, New Zealand for 14 years. And it was in Auckland that the decision was made to come to the United States. So in 2012, I bought a business up to the United States, moved to Charleston, South Carolina, ran that business for 6 years. and then sold it in 2018 and really had one of those halftime experiences. I did actually read 3 chapters of the book halftime. Can't tell you that I did any of their programs or read the rest of the book. I'm one of their poster boys. Every time I see them, they laugh at me. But it really was. It was one of those experiences where I went, Lord, I'm done with trying to do this all myself. I really want to spend the last season of my life full-time for the kingdom. So you know what my gifts and skills are. I have no idea what you've got for me. I'm a bit old to be a pastor. So, open some doors. And the door for TrustBridge opened. So that's really how I got to the US through business, and then made that transition.
Well, that's awesome. Paul, on the Generosity Now podcast, we talk a lot about generosity and whole life stewardship. Would you share a bit about your own journey as it relates to generosity and stewardship? Yeah,
absolutely. I'm going to go all the way back to my childhood. Growing up in church, my parents were always very faithful in their giving, and I saw them actually putting money aside. We ran almost like an envelope system, and they had money aside for the church and they had money aside for expenses. And every month I would see that money go into that. But I want to share a story with you that really was the transformational thing for me on giving. And when I was a child, so I grew up on this farm. It was a very unique farm, about 4,500 acres. It was sheep, wheat, and pigs. For all those that are listening that are into farming, there we go, tractors and all that sort of good stuff. This property had a natural lake that sometimes would flood most of the property. And so we would end up with all this wildlife on our property, including ducks and fish and birds and all sorts of stuff. And this one season, we actually had planted a crop in the lake bed. It had grown. It was ready for harvest. It was valued at about $60,000 when we harvested it. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and it flooded. And to a point where the heads of this crop were just sitting out of the water, and the ducks would swim along the surface and eat this crop. And it broke my father's heart that he had lost all this income and lost this crop. And so he applied to the local government, said, can I get a special license to invite some people to come and shoot these ducks? Now, this might not be good to talk about, but this is my story, so I'm just sharing the testimony. And we had people come to our farm to shoot ducks over the years, and we had never charged them. My parents were always very generous, always let people come on for free, and we would have hundreds and hundreds of people come to our property, camp on our property, and go out shooting ducks. This particular weekend, my parents said, right, we're going to invite the local service organization that was looking after, putting parks into the local town and doing good things for the community. It wasn't overly a Christian organization, but it was a service organization. They said, look, you come and collect the money and we'll give you half of it. And we charged $20 a head, and 3,000 people turned up.
Oh, my goodness.
Do your numbers, that's $60,000. That's the exact amount that we lost for the crop. So tell me that God, didn't provide for all of our needs. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. And my parents gave half of that away. They gave half of it away. They gave a little bit to us kids, which I was excited about. But it was just such an opportunity for me to see how generous my parents really were and what it really meant to be generous. And so as I became an adult and I committed my life to Christ, I moved from Sydney to Perth and I started my very first job. And I remember sitting in the local church, the very first sermon that they had on giving. And I went, you know what? I know about this. And so I am young, I am broke, I've got nothing, but I'm going to give immediately, I'm going to give a tithe of my income. And I'm not going to do it based on what turns up in my pay packet. I'm going to do it on what the top line says. So I took the tax man away and I gave before the tax man got his money. And you know what? I've done that my entire life. And God has blessed all the work that I've ever done. My income has always continued to increase. I've never been overly wealthy, but God has provided for all of our needs, and He's allowed us to be generous in all that we do. But generosity to me is not just about money. Generosity is also about time. And one of the things that I've been really called to personally is to use the gifts and skills that God's given me to help others. And I'm a handyman, so I can fix things. I can do plumbing, electrical, carpentry. And so, in our church, I started a little ministry to help single ladies and the older folk. And I remember once building a disabled ramp for a couple. They were in their 80s. One of the ladies had dementia, and she just could never get out of the house. And I remember when we finished the ramp and she was actually able to walk outside the house, to see the look on her face and to know that we were able to actually help her do that. Was just a great opportunity. We had another lady that had cancer. She lost her leg, so she was on a prosthetic. She'd gone through a divorce. She was living in a house that was built, it was 180 years old. So you can imagine the condition of this thing. It had no insulation in the walls or in the floors. And she asked if this little group at church would come and help her install the underfloor insulation because she couldn't get under the house with her prosthetic leg. And so I put together a team of guys and we went up there and we got as dirty as you can imagine under a 180-year-old house, covered in dust, but we installed the underfloor insulation. We went back and ultimately installed the in-wall insulation. And I remember going to Thanksgiving at her house just this last year. And I sat in this house and she had a fire going and I said, "How's the insulation?" And she goes, "It's fantastic, it works." And so there's a couple of examples of really the journey that I've been on personally, both with my financial resources and with my time, and how, God calls us to use every resource that we've got to serve others in any way that we can. And so I just do the little bit that I can do.
That is just beautiful, beautiful stories of that whole life stewardship. It's not just the finances. It's just relationship too. To hear you say that you went back to that house and had Thanksgiving, how beautiful of a story of God creating those relationships and you calling other people in to do it with you, Paul. So many people want to be invited in and you helped those people also join in that process. That's just beautiful.
Absolutely. We've got the pictures to prove it as well.
It's great.
It's really fun.
Paul, tell us a little bit more of the work of TrustBridge Global. You told us how you got there. It was kind of that halftime kind of crisis moment, but tell us the work of TrustBridge Global.
Well, let's just go back to the very beginning. I had no clue about donor advised funds. I didn't know they existed. I didn't know who the National Christian Foundation was. Never heard of them. Never heard of TrustBridge. And a friend of mine, actually a C12 guy, says, "Hey, here's a job you should apply for." It was with TrustBridge. And it was for the executive vice president's role. And I looked at what they needed. And it was predominantly like a business development role, helping clients. And I went, I could probably do this. So I applied for the role. Unbeknownst to me, 645 other people applied for the same role. And so somehow I'm here. And you could talk to Bob Collins, who's the CEO of TrustBridge, and ask him whether it was a good decision or not. But I have to say I'm thoroughly enjoying the role here. So let's just talk a little bit about TrustBridge and its history. And let's go back to the NCF days, because NCF really had a challenge with international granting and didn't have a good solution for it. And so a couple of people from NCF actually said, "Look, we need to find a solution for this," and actually put together a working team to create that solution, and ultimately invited Bob Collins, who was at the time the president of NCF in Tampa Bay, to become the CEO of TrustBridge. And so Bob and his wife Tricia started TrustBridge back in really 2016 was when all the formations were happening, but the first grants and contributions really didn't happen until 2017. So they spent a little bit of time doing proof of concept, basically running it out of their home on spreadsheets and QuickBooks. And in 2018, they invited me to join them as their third employee to do whatever was needed, ultimately to, help explain what we do to other people, to clients, to charities, and to donors. But, you know what it's like when you're starting a business. You do everything. So I did a little bit of technology, a little bit of marketing, and so I was able to help with a number of things. So TrustBridge itself, when it first got started in 2017, did $4 million of cross-border granting in its very first year. And so we were all excited about that. We thought that was pretty spectacular. If you want to be really technical, it was 3.7 million, but I rounded up to 4 million just to make the numbers sound good. But as we go through and look at exactly what's happened over time, we've taken in well over $500 million US dollars in contributions, and we've granted out now. It's actually 350 million US dollars. It's 308 million Swiss francs, but when we convert it to US dollars, it's close enough to 350 million US dollars. And we've sent that out to 94 different countries, over 4,000 grants since we started, since 2017. So it's been an amazing journey. God has just opened doors for us. I cannot tell you how many people have come to us and said, where have you been? We didn't know this existed. This is what we were looking for. You're solving our problem. We didn't know that you could give money from the US anywhere in the world and just give directly to that charity without having to give to another US 501c3. I mean, TrustBridge itself, we're a ministry. We take a 1% grant assessment as the money flows through us, and that's how we survive on that 1%. So it makes it work, and it's just been a tremendous experience.
Yeah, the frustration, you highlight the frustration that folks have, and that is the inability to send charitable dollars or even charitable dollars internationally where there is no 501c3 that they would go through. And you guys are able to go into some of the hardest countries of the world for sending money actually as well through your Swiss hub and things like that. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, if we're talking to predominantly a US audience here, then, the biggest challenge for donors when they try to give internationally is, first of all, it's just a lot of hassle to try and sort out. If you have to go and do the research yourself and figure it out, and you want to go and read the IRS code on how you can legally get money out of the country and keep your tax deduction, good luck in reading that document. It's not pleasant to read. So that's the first thing, is just the compliance side of it. Secondly, is how much time does it take to do all that? You're busy doing what you're doing. You don't need to be doing this as well. Someone's already solved it. Let them do it for you, and they can do it a whole bunch faster. And thirdly is the cost. One of the biggest reasons that TrustBridge was formed and started was that there were people doing this in the secular world, and they were charging 5%, 7%, 12% or more to do this cross-border granting, and they were for-profit businesses. And so TrustBridge has come in almost as a disruptor in this marketplace, to be honest with you, and charging just 1% to do this. And we're a non-profit. So for us, it's not about making money. We're a ministry ourselves, and we want to serve and support all of the donors that work with NCF to be able to do international granting, to open up the world to you. Instead of just having to focus on US 501c3s, the world is now your oyster, as they say.
So, Paul, I tend to be a little bit on that more technical side, and a 501c3 is really just a U.S. definition of those charities and ministries, and that's where it gets difficult when it goes internationally, is because that same designation is not consistent in any other country, and they are all different, and that's really what you guys are doing, is you're working in that space of all of those different technical spaces of each country's laws and who can receive the money and who can't receive the money. Is that correct?
Correct. So let me give you an example. Let's say you want to send money to Africa. Pick a country, Kenya, Nigeria, Kenya, doesn't matter. As an American sitting here going, well, can I legally send money to these folks in Kenya? I don't know. Are they a legal charity? I don't know. And so that's the work that TrustBridge does. And so for us, what we do is we actually open up what we call a charity fund for these charities. We ask them to apply for a charity fund. We capture from them all their formation documents. We capture the names and the documents of the key people involved. We do a global background check for fraud and terrorism on everyone that's involved in those organizations. And we ask for 3 years of financials. We want to look at them and say, are they actually doing what they say they're doing? And if we wanted to look through and say, look, were they equivalent to a US 501c3? We could actually say, yes, they are. So they're doing the same types of work. We're able to give to registered charities around the world, to churches, to educational institutions and hospitals.
In the past, if people wanted to send money to, like you said, Kenya, and there's not a US-based 501c3, a lot of times the solution was like Western Union, or in some countries, literally they were carrying in cash to get it through and into the right hands. Neither of which are a great solution. And that's where TrustBridge has been able to provide a much safer and better solution for those type of situations, right?
Absolutely. Look, if people want to send money by Western Union, first of all, you're not going to be able to send it from your NCF fund, because you're not going to be able to send tax-deductible money via Western Union. It's just not possible. And so the whole reason that TrustBridge exists is to maintain that tax deductibility and also provide a safe and secure, trusted mechanism for carrying that money to that other country. And yes, we do look at all the compliance in those countries. Let's take India. India has a very unique set of laws that requires the charities to apply to their government to actually be allowed to take in foreign contributions. They have to have a bank account at the same bank in Delhi, at the State Bank of India in Delhi, and they're all at the same bank. So you can imagine that government is looking at who is sending them the money and who is receiving money. So this is a big thing for people to be able to have that comfort that they're able to send money to these charities all over the world and not to have to go through all that heartache themselves, but allow someone else to do this for them. The reality is it's costing 1% of the grant to do that. And I can't find anyone that would be able to do it for less than that with the service that we provide.
And it's awesome. I happen to know that India is one of the more complex places to get money into because they don't just have one designation for charity. They have at least 3 different designations, and they separate all of it. And so there's a lot of, and this is just compliance laws of all the different countries and understanding that. And Paul, I just thank you for what TrustBridge does because it is highly, highly complex, and it's a phenomenal service that you guys provide.
I get to do this full time. And yes, we're helping, but this is God allowing us to be able to use our gifts and skills to serve NCF and to serve NCF's donors.
Well, and I know that I've connected you with a bunch of those donors, and the response and the ability, even for charities that you have not had actually on your radar and do all of that compliance work behind the scenes to be able to assist these donors to do it. Are there any guardrails that you guys, like dollar-wise or minimums that you guys usually you have in place for our givers of how much they want to send overseas?
It's a good question. We don't technically have a minimum, but let me just take you through the process so you'll understand a little better. When we set up this charity fund for these charities, it's kind of like an NCF fund. They can take in multiple contributions and build up a balance, and we actually encourage them to do that. It's only when they draw the money down to their bank account do they actually pay that 1% grant assessment. And that's subject to a minimum assessment of $300. So do the numbers, and 1% of $30,000 is $300. So if you're going to send $5,000, suddenly you're now paying quite a bit more than 1%. You're now at 6%. So we basically say to anyone, look, we'll send whatever you want us to send, but it's going to cost $300 to send it. So it doesn't make sense to send $1,000. It probably makes sense at around $5,000. It's probably a good level. If I was saying to anyone at NCF, what number would I put it on? I would put it at $5,000. Anything above that is probably okay.
And Paul, thinking about like some of the mechanisms, if somebody said, hey, I need to, they're listening, they're like, I had no idea this has solved such a huge issue. How quickly, or like what's the time process take between, connecting with you to having the charity go through the process and the background check to where they would actually receive funds?
Sure.
Best case scenario, and maybe what's normal.
Okay. Well, we actually did do a test and do a best case scenario one, so I'll save that one for last. But the normal scenario is once the actual charity has completed our application, and when I say complete an application, it's an online application. They're uploading documents to a server for us. And once they've done that, we're about 24 to 48 hours away from approving that. That's how long it takes us to approve the fund. They then get a unique URL that they can hand out to anyone globally. They can click on a link and it says, what country are you giving from? I'm giving from the United States, or wherever they're giving from. And it automatically routes them to our local network member that's going to issue the tax receipt locally. And then the actual movement of the money probably takes a couple of days because we're doing wire transfers to move the money across the borders. Now let's go back to that example of how fast can we do this. I remember having a call from a client who was the donor in the United Kingdom, wanting to actually give to a charity, and they needed that give link, and they needed that give link within 2 days. And so this was on a Tuesday afternoon. We did that whole thing, talk to the charity, get the application back in, approve the charity in 23 hours, start to finish. So please don't put us in that test on a regular basis. It's not going to happen. Expect, what I normally say to people, look, it's going to take roughly a week from the time I first talk to you to the time you can actually make your grant. That's a good way to look at it.
And that is so helpful just to set expectations for people. But I would also assume that you have charities that are already approved, that have already happened, and maybe I'm asking for something to go to a charity that somebody else already has. Is there a list of those charities that people can see?
That's a really good question, Laurie. Yes, there is. Funny you should ask that. So if you go to our website, trustbridgeglobal.com, the top right-hand corner says Discover Charities, and there is a platform there called Giving Space. Giving Space is a global directory of all of the charities that are vetted with TrustBridge that want to be visible. Now, let me clarify the difference here. There are some charities that are in countries that just cannot be public about what they're doing. And I think we all get that. And so they're not going to be on Giving Space, and you may need to just send us an email and ask us. Come through your NCF office. They'll ask the questions for you, and we can let you know if they're available. But you could go on to Giving Space and you could say, hey, look, I'm interested in education in Kenya. Well, great. You can go and filter out all the charities that are actually doing that type of work in Kenya and find them and say, well, you know what? I really don't know who I want to give to, but I do know this is what I'm interested in and this is the country I'm interested in. And let's see who TrustBridge has already got. If you've got that, then there is no need to go through any of that process. We don't have to set up a charity fund. There's no $150 to set up that charity fund. It is really just a matter of clicking a link and give. And it says, how do I want to give? And if you're coming in through NCF, it will ask the question, do you want to give by credit card? Do you want to give by, no, I don't. I want to give by my actual donor advised fund. And it gives them the option to do that on the TrustBridge platform. And then it tells you what to do back at the NCF platform and how to make that happen. So it's actually quite seamless for you. One thing I did want to clarify before I forget is that TrustBridge only gives to charities. It does not give to individuals. So I'm not sure if that question was going to come out at some stage, but I wanted to make sure I get that out there before we finish our call, just in case I hadn't mentioned it.
Well, that's super helpful. Paul, we do have a growing international listenership to the Generosity Now podcast, which is super awesome and encouraging. And I know in the past that we've also talked about the work that TrustBridge Global helps with in some countries with people that have pay taxes in both countries that they have citizenship or live in or have homes and things like that. Can you touch base on a little bit of that and the work that you guys do there?
Okay, so depending on how far down the rabbit hole we want to go here, but let's just say we're dealing with someone that is in Switzerland or Germany or somewhere like that, and they want to get a local tax deduction. Well, yes, we can help them. Because of the network that we've built of like-minded Christian foundations around the world, donors can give locally into that local foundation, and that money can then go to a local charity or can leave and cross the border and come to any other charity anywhere in the world. However, there are some countries, the United Kingdom is one of them, and we're just about to have the same thing in Switzerland, is what I call a dual tax deduction. That means you might be living in the United Kingdom, earning income in the United Kingdom, but you're still a US citizen, and you want to actually have a US tax deduction and claim UK gift aid. We actually have an entity, it's called IGF Transatlantic. IGF stands for International Generosity Foundation. That's our US 501c3. It has a wholly owned subsidiary in the United Kingdom, which is called IGF Transatlantic. So those donors in the UK can actually give and basically claim taxes in two counthes. It's very cool.
Well, claim the tax deduction in two countries, which is very fascinating. That's fabulous. This is a little bit of my nerdiness. I used to work in expatriate tax returns, and so I did those dual tax returns. So I just think that that's brilliant that you guys have been able to accomplish that issue. Because I was going to go down a little bit of that same path of, you made me think that people can give from all over the world, knowing that they're giving into a U.S. entity, a 501c3 into TrustBridge. So it doesn't matter where they live, as long as they recognize that they're giving into the U.S. TrustBridge entity.
They're actually, if they're giving from all over the world, they're going to be giving into Switzerland, into TrustBridge in Switzerland, not to the US.
Okay, good to know.
So these charity funds that we talk about are all held in Switzerland, but every one of these foundations, which includes the one that we've got in the US, includes NCF, are an on-ramp to these charity funds that are held in Switzerland. So they give locally in the United Kingdom, they give in the US, they give in, the Philippines or Australia, and they give into these charity funds, but they're giving locally to a local foundation. And then behind the scenes, and we built some pretty cool technology to track all this, by the way. Let's not go down that rabbit hole unless we have to. on how we actually track all that money, and then the money lands in the charity fund for that charity. So they might have, $1,000 coming in from Australia, $5,000 from the UK, $10,000 from Germany, and it all lands in one fund, and all ultimately gets turned into one currency, by the way. So there's another whole discussion, is the currency discussion. So we make it easy for people, and we're even able to send money into many countries. If we're sending money into a country on a regular basis, we will actually convert into the local currency if they want us to. In fact, we even say to the charities, go get a quote from your local bank, see what you can convert at. If we send you US dollars, see how many local Brazilian real that you will get. Or ask us and see how many we will give you. Now, because we're doing so much foreign exchange transaction on a monthly basis, we get a really good foreign exchange rate. So for most exchange rates around the world, not all of them, most exchange rates, we're able to do it for at least 1% or less. For the stronger currencies, we can even get it down to 0.5%. Now, I challenge anyone to walk into a foreign exchange booth in any airport and see what the rates are going to be and what the percentage rates are. They're nowhere near that. And even your bank, if you went to your local bank, you're probably going to get hit with 2% or something like that. And so ask us, tell it and say, what can you do this for? So we are sending into Brazil in Brazilian real. We're sending into India in Indian rupees. And there's a growing list of countries. I think it's about 14 different currencies that we're sending in right now that we do. We actually bank with multiple banks. We bank with UBS in Switzerland. They're our investment bank. And we bank with Crown Agents Bank in the United Kingdom. They are specialists at foreign exchange. That's all they do. And so they do a lot of our foreign exchange for us.
Now, I'm curious, as I was looking at the different countries and projects on the TrustBridge site that you mentioned, I was wondering if you give us an example or two of just some good stories of organizations that donors here in the U.S. are supporting the work, and I don't know, a success story or so.
Yeah, well, let's go back to a really good NCF success story. So when the war broke out in Ukraine, Bob Collins and I were actually attending the Kingdom Advisors Conference at the time in Orlando. And we said, hey, look, we need to do something about this. And we created what we call a rapid response fund. And we will do this from time to time when there is a global crisis, either something like a war or an act of God, major hurricanes, fires, things like that. We did the same for some major bushfires in Australia. But we came to NCF and we said, look, we've created this fund. We really don't even know who we're going to give this to yet. We'll call it a pooled fund for now. And we're going to encourage your donors to give into this fund, and we're going to give to ministries that are actually doing relief work on the ground in Ukraine. Now, they might have been from neighboring countries going in, or they might have been actually from Ukraine. And so I was amazed to see what happened. In a period of 6 weeks, we went from $0 in and zero charities that we could give to 20 different charities that were fully vetted on our platform that were doing relief work in Ukraine, and $5.5 million came in, and the majority of that came in from NCF. I mean, it was incredible to see it happen. It was an amazing, amazing story. I don't know whether you know this, but I'm not sure what it was like in 2023, but I know in 2022, the single largest grantee for NCF was the US entity of TrustBridge, because the NCF folks were trying to send money outside of the US to charities all over the world. So we would love for that to continue. Let's continue to set records. Let's continue to send money all over the world and put us to the test, see what we can do.
Well, Paul, if people have questions.
They can get in contact with their local NCF office. They are fully connected with us here at TrustBridge. So you don't need to know who I am or how to get to me. You are welcome to come to the TrustBridge website and to just, fill out the Connect Us form. You're welcome to connect with me personally. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me anywhere. But my recommendation is to go through your local NCF office, and they'll connect you with us.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Really do appreciate you being on the Generosity Now podcast with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah, as we often say in close, on the Generosity Now podcast, we do seek to inspire, equip, and connect our listeners for generous kingdom impact and whole life stewardship. For more information on us, please check us out at ncfgiving.com/Rocky Mountains and generositynow.org. You can find more out on TrustBridge Global at trustbridgeglobal.com and connect with your local NCF office. Please go ahead and subscribe to our podcast. Leave us a 5-star review and share with your network. And today's doxology Laurie's going to read is out of Deuteronomy chapter 15.
If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need.
Yes and amen. Paul, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Paul, we so appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you.